So I made Photoshop for the Game Boy Advance. Look everyone, I can explain. I've been sick for a week and I didn't know what to do. But let's go back to the beginning. No, not that far. There was once a person who decided to do some crazy things, going to the mountains and also trying to make some movies. But he just thought about, what if I make some Game Boy Advance games? Yeah, that was super painful and I didn't learn from my mistakes, and I even tried to make Minecraft on it. And by the way, I'm still continue making this, but that doesn't stop me from starting other side projects. And then there was a very regular day. I was just sitting down, working on some projects, and what if I can access something like this on my Game Boy Advance? Because clearly this machine was made for creative work. I mean, everyone who thinks something else just has the wrong opinion. But I'm sure you're wondering, how do you do something like this? Well, first, it's very good to make a prototype on some stronger hardware and in a programming language you really understand. I did that, tried to figure out what kind of features I want, and then I also wanted to figure out how it should look like on the Game Boy Advance. So I made another prototype, and yeah, also, of course, it is very important to understand the C language, because that's basically what you use for the Game Boy Advance. And I did try to learn from my old projects and first plan everything before I start writing the code, and everything still didn't work at the beginning. The thing is, I wanted the layers to have a lot of features. They should have masks and colors. And with all of this, I can only fit 2 layers into the Game Boy Advance's RAM and still have enough room for everything else. Because the thing is, the Game Boy Advance has a very low amount of RAM, but the RAM is very fast. Still, if you want to have everything visible at the same time, like in a photo editing software, you kind of have to make some sacrifices. Of course, I can make a version in the future that has more than 2 layers, but then I need to make the image size a bit smaller or do other sacrifices. And speaking of the image size, I decided to make the image size the screen size of the Game Boy Advance. Of course, I can add options to just create a custom canvas in your own size, but all of this takes time and I first really want to get a working version. And after quite some time, I got a version that was working. It still had some bugs and I really had to fix all of this, but eventually I arrived at this version. And so far, I think I managed to fix most of the problems. I'm not going to tell you all the technical details because then the video is going to take a lot of time. A few of my main ideas were, of course, to use mode 4 on the GBA with the back buffer. I draw everything on a hidden page and then flip the pages instantly to prevent flickering and tearing. Believe me, I learned it the hard way that this is necessary. Also, I figured out that making the math for the color was easier to do in RGB 555, but then I still had to convert everything to RGB 332 because that just works better on the display of the GBA. And a very important performance adjustment I had to make was using dirty rects. So basically a rendering pipeline where the app tracks only the parts of the canvas that change. So I don't have to redraw every pixel, every frame, because it kind of is difficult in a hardware like this to do that. But of course, when we do something like a transform of the canvas, we still need a full refresh. That's definitely noticeable in the performance. But the thing is, I really tried to make the performance as good as possible, but at the same time, in a photo editing software, it's not a game, so it is not that important. But yeah, you also don't want to wait for too long to do something. So far, I have managed to implement a brush and an eraser with a color picker and masks and a mask edit tool. I also tried to implement thumbnails for the layers and I was very happy when I got this working on the GBA. Also, I implemented different top bars and also tried to do some experimental features like saturation and blend modes. Yeah. I still need to work on those, and of course transforming, moving and changing the size of a layer and also changing the size of the brush. So you can definitely do some basic compositing on this. And then of course there's the question, how do we actually import and export images on the Game Boy Advance? Basically, the one way how you can really do it is by just using the save files from the Game Boy Advance. And yeah, After figuring out a few things, I just decided to build an SRAM export and import tool that works on the web. So basically, on the computer, you can take any image and just convert it into a save file for the Game Boy Advance. Then you can load that file on the Game Boy Advance and open it. And you can also export your edited file and open it on the computer again. Isn't this amazing? Yeah, to be honest, I'm quite happy how all of this turned out. And I think there are still a lot of things I can add to this project, especially giving the user a custom canvas size and the option to add more layers. And of course I can also add more image editing tools. The next obvious thing would be a text tool, but yeah, that still takes a bit of energy to do. Also, I have a lot of shortcuts in this, and I created a help menu where you can just find all of your shortcuts. And for all of you who want to try this, you still have to wait a little bit. I am planning to release the code of this, but only when the project is a bit more mature than this. But if you really want to try it out right now, I've decided to provide the current version to all of my Patreon supporters, because I really want to give something special to the people who support my channel. And if anyone has some ideas what I should add to this photo editor, write it in the comments. Also, I kinda made a version for the DS as well.